Next on the SEC in 60, the Rebels and the Dogs. They meet in the Egg Bowl. That's quite the battle. Today, they meet right here. Plus, the top 5 kickers in the SEC, and also who will be our X Factor. The SEC in 60 starts right now. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the SEC in 60. We appreciate the time, and this is the place to join us for SEC football talk each and every Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern and noon Central, joined by Stephen M. Smith of TouchdownAlabama.net. Stephen M., how are you today?
I'm doing just great, Mark. You know, it's fun to do a show in the library, but let's be honest, nothing beats the comfort of your own home.
Yeah, we see you're pretty comfortable there. We don't want to get too comfy, Stephen M., so don't pass out on me. Don't grab a pillow back there and snooze off on me. I know I'm going to go a little bit long-winded possibly on some of this analysis, but hang with me. Again, the SEC in 60, we join you every Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern and noon Central, and this is your place for SEC football breakdown each and every week. Plus, hey, if you miss us live, which we would love for you to join the live show and then start to tweet us in some comments and questions, you can also catch the video post on YouTube at MarkRogersTV.com, also at MarkRogersTV on YouTube, the video post that's available just about 90 minutes after we're done here live every Monday afternoon. And then, hey, if podcast is your thing, because you're on the go all the time, grab the podcast. It is uploaded every Tuesday morning, so we've got the SEC in 60 available for you every Tuesday morning. Also, here on Mark Rogers TV, tons going on. The season is like 10 days away. We've got Mark Rogers TV's College Football Podcast, which we're undergoing some changes, but we're still getting that to you every Friday morning. The Mark Rogers TV College Football Podcast, where, let's see, we focused on North Carolina and Alabama this past week. Video releases throughout the week. We're focusing on the top 5 in the SEC at every position, top 10 national positions, and we're breaking down, and I have made this vow, and it's going to be a run to the wire to knock out every schedule in college football, Power 5 conferences, before we get to that Thursday night opener, and I've got my work cut out for me right there. And then the daily poll at Mark Rogers TV. So if you follow me on Twitter at Mark Rogers TV, we've got a daily poll that comes out. So, for example, this week, Stephen M., I don't remember or recall if you've jumped in on this one, but we're going with the top quarterback in the Pac-12. So who is the top quarterback in the Pac-12? That's our daily poll question for today at Mark Rogers TV. So follow me on Twitter. Follow Stephen M. on Twitter. It's ESPN_future. And you can follow Stephen M. Smith. Stephen M., you're always doing well, so I don't need to ask you again. We're going to dive right into Ole Miss and Mississippi State. I just thought it was apropos to line up the Dogs and the Rebels for a bit of a showdown here on SEC in 60. So we're going to talk some Ole Miss football right out of the gate, and then we're going to follow up with the Dogs, because I think this is going to be a pretty close competition between the two Mississippi rivals in regards to the SEC Western Division. So for Ole Miss, the storylines for this season, you could go in a number of directions, I think, Stephen M. I'm first off going to go with that young talent theme because of the recruiting class, specifically in 2013, with Treadwell and Kimdichie and Tunsil and on and on and on, the 5th-rated class by most services in the country. That young talent really hit the forefront immediately in the opener against Vandy. We saw it all over the place and really I'm not going to say carried this football team, but was certainly a spark with this football team. So your thoughts about just the overall talent level at Ole Miss, Stephen M., and how it's been upgraded, and your thoughts just overall about the Rebels at this point.
Well, the talent that the Rebels have, Mark, it's outstanding. You talk about Denzel and Robert Kimdichie. You look at Laquan Treadwell, a guy that can stretch the field, savvy route runner, can take the top off of defense with speed. Ole Miss has done a great job. Hugh Freeze has done a great job recruiting pieces into his system that fit, but not only fit, but that can fit well and make explosive plays. I think last season, Ole Miss was set up for success, but really didn't know how to handle their own hype. I feel like this season they kind of get a stranglehold on how they come into the season motivated, but then added the productivity on top of that motivation to get the job done. They bring back one of the more experienced passers in the SEC with Bo Wallace at quarterback. So I'm excited to see, what the people at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium with the Rebels in Oxford, Mississippi can really do. Because for the first time in a while, Mark, the cries of the state of Mississippi are being heard. This could possibly be the year that Hotty Toddy and Hail State could both be good.
Well, you bring up a good point about just kind of the poise possibly not being there. I don't want to discount this football team, but because of the youth, I remember them specifically talking a ton of trash before that Alabama game. They walked into Tuscaloosa and got shut out. So they had tremendous talent. They played very well pretty much across the board against everybody but Alabama. They took Texas A&M to the wire. They beat LSU at home. That was a huge victory for them. They should have beat Mississippi State, but they let it go late and lost in overtime and fumbled going into the end zone and lost to Mississippi State. And so this was a football team that really delivered most of the time. So the effort and the talent was there last season. Maybe not the depth that they're still trying to recruit for depth. And also maybe not the poise that they needed to go into Tuscaloosa and put forth the kind of effort that they needed to be competitive in that football game. But, hey, the defense showed up in Tuscaloosa and held Alabama down to like 9-0 in the third quarter. So the defense played pretty well in that game, but the Alabama defense just clamped down on Ole Miss. I'm going to talk a little personnel and throw out some names here because we start with the quarterback, Bo Wallace. You mentioned his ability, his talent as a dual threat quarterback. He threw 18 touchdowns last season with 10 picks, ran for 6 touchdowns. And who would think this typically wouldn't be the case where the two most experienced quarterbacks in the league come out of Mississippi State and Ole Miss. But we've got them today, and we're talking Bo Wallace and Dak Prescott. We will a little bit later at Mississippi State. I want to break down some personnel that could be key. Laquan Treadwell, of course, he's the guy on offense, 72 receptions last year. Kem Dichie on defense. He should really break out after having a very solid freshman campaign. Cody Pruitt's a guy in the secondary at safety who led the SEC with 6 interceptions. Those guys are kind of at the forefront, but breaking down some guys that may need to step up and fill some gaps and play much bigger roles than they did this last season for Ole Miss to gain the contention status that you talked about just a minute ago. There's a guy, Evan Ingram, who's a sophomore tight end, played 8 games, caught 21 passes last year. He's going to have a bigger role in the offense. He splits out wide. He's a mismatch for linebackers. Look out for Evan Ingram. They got a redshirt freshman quarterback, and we know quarterbacks get hurt. You almost need 2 of them these days. In Devontae Kincaid, that they're really high on this redshirt freshman quarterback who threw 8 passes last season, 5 for 8, and also Ryan Buchanan, who got 10 passes last season. So they're kind of battling it out for the backup job. Keith Lewis, he's a senior linebacker, and with Mike Mary, with all that talent coming back on defense, they lose their leader in Mike Mary, a leader to the standpoint that he wore the famed Chucky Mullins number 38. So they're trying to replace him on defense. Keith Lewis is going to be a guy as a senior who's going to have to step in for him. Again, we mentioned on offense, no Jeff Scott. He's gone. 2 guys to look out for here who are very explosive, quick, shifty kind of guys, both of them. Tavius Mathers and Mark Dotson caught those guys in the spring game, and they got quite a bit of time last year and shouldered much of the load for this Ole Miss team, even with Scott in the lineup and Scott getting hurt at times last season. The defensive line has become a strength. I believe that Hugh Freeze really wanted to bulk up the defensive line, and that was one of his main concerns and main points of emphasis in building this football program. So Kem Dichie, everybody knows about Robert Kem Dichie, and rightfully so. But there's a guy, D.T. Shackelford, 7.5 tackles for loss at defensive end, who's extremely good. Cameron Wiggum, Levant Hooks, 2.5 tackles for loss, and Isaac Gross is a playmaker at defensive end who actually had better stats last season with 3.5 sacks and 9 tackles for loss than Kem Dichie. So also look out for one. I'm going to drop one other name on you, Stephen M. Smith. It's true freshman cornerback C.J. Hampton, who really could. They're really excited about his potential and what he could bring in a reserve role, and then starting probably as a sophomore there at Ole Miss. So I think our third bullet point on this slide is what we need to see out of Ole Miss for them to take the next step, and it's fairly obvious. They need to win a statement game. Now, some could say that they did it against LSU last year, but remember that they did go 3-5 in the SEC, so at that point late in the season, did much matter for a division title. But a statement win, Stephen M., that's what Ole Miss needs.
Ole Miss needs a statement win, Mark, and they're circling Alabama on the schedule again this season for that statement win. This season, Alabama goes to Vaught Hemingway Stadium. They go to Oxford, Mississippi, in that raucous stadium. You talk about Death Valley. Those fans down there in Oxford, Mark, they know how to get down. They know how to make that field really noisy, really boisterous and hard for the opposing team to get the audibles and the pulls out. This is said to be a trap game for Alabama because the last time the Crimson Tide were in Oxford, marked back 2011, Alabama won 65-7, but it's been 2 years, 2 to 3 years since Alabama's took that trip to Oxford. They can't go into Ole Miss lackadaisical because Ole Miss is going to come out with a spirited crowd, hungry mentality to get that statement win, and they may try to get it this season being at home against Alabama.
Of course, Darius Bryant, one of the top players in the SEC as well, in the defensive backfield for Ole Miss. And, yeah, I think you bring up two excellent points on the periphery. Off the field would be that, that Alabama team was pretty good in 2011 from what I remember. They were pretty good. And, of course, the atmosphere in Oxford for those Ole Miss football games rivals the best in the country, and it's very unique. There are rabid fan bases all over the place, but they have just built up a tradition of different activities surrounding that football game. And if you've never been to the Grove, you got to check it out sometime there at the University of Mississippi. It is quite the spectacle on game day. All right, let's look at the Ole Miss football schedule here for 2014 because I'm loving what Ole Miss is doing with its football schedule and taking itself seriously as a main factor in the SEC and nationally, because I was down in the SEC for 6 years covering Alabama, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State, really the entire conference, but those three schools in particular, week in, week out, all the time. And Ole Miss never scheduled anybody. Their schedule was always littered with VMI and Troy and Arkansas State and Memphis. The last few years, really going back about the last 7 to 8 years, Texas, the last 2 years, they've put a lot of good teams on their schedule, and they do it again this year with that showdown against Boise State. And maybe the Broncos aren't quite as good as they've been over the last 10 or 12 years, but they still have a solid program. That's a bit of a showdown in Atlanta. As we look at the first half of the schedule for Ole Miss here, I'll let you know, Stephen M., what stands out to me. And, of course, it's the Boise State game, because as we go to the college football playoffs, and I'm not going to pretend that Ole Miss and Boise State are going to be serious threats to get into the playoffs, but it just points to the type of games that we need to see to compare conferences. Because once these conference teams start playing conference games, you can compare them in terms of the eyeball test all you want, but results don't conclude anything because conferences are playing each other. And when you add up the records, they all go 500 within the conference. So we need big-time conference, non-conference games to judge these conferences for a college football playoff. The game at Vandy has turned out to be a really good game for Ole Miss. It's their designated rival. They take on Vandy in game 2. Got a game against Louisiana and Memphis, so not the best games there. But at the same time, can't expect these teams to play 4 stellar games. They need a break, especially in the SEC. And then the game that you're talking about with Alabama, then they hit the real rough stretch. Alabama, Texas A&M, Tennessee should be much improved, at LSU, and Auburn. So your thoughts about this first half of games for the Rebels?
Well, going back to the Boise State game that you mentioned, Mark, yes, Boise State gone over days of Kellen Moore, Chris Peterson, Austin Pettis, Titus Young, Doug Martin, players on that nature. But Boise State still recruits well. they still have a talented core on that football team. So having Ole Miss go out and schedule Boise State does say to me they want to get better. They want to be looked at as a threat in the SEC, and not just a threat in the SEC, but a formidable team within the conference. You look at the schedule with going to LSU, playing Alabama. You play a much improved Tennessee team, which once again, I'm going to throw this out there. Tennessee against Ole Miss, it's another confidence boost game for quarterback Justin Worley of Tennessee. Can he get the job done by hooking up with his receivers and placing the ball in the right spots on the field? Arkansas is going to be, not Arkansas, but I guess Tennessee is going to be a much improved team. Auburn is going to be a tough challenge. LSU, as I mentioned, Alabama. So Ole Miss has got a bit of a stretch, but if they're able to once again complement the talent with consistency, they should be fine.
Yeah, because the way I look at it, Stephen M., if you look at the first half of this schedule, Ole Miss should win the first 4 games. I know Boise State's going to be a very good challenge, but at the same time, Ole Miss has superior athletes and speed. They should win on the carpet in Atlanta against Boise State. They're going to win the first 4 games of the season if they can get by the Broncos. Don't want to say, again, that that's a gimme game by any stretch. Then they got that stretch that we just talked about, Alabama, Texas A&M, Tennessee, LSU, and Auburn. I know we're pushed off the slide a little bit, but what we're looking at there is they need to go 3-2 in those 5 games. They need to go 3-2, and they've got an opportunity, I think, legitimately to go 4-1. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but they should beat Tennessee. Then between the Texas A&M game, I know that it's on the road, but I believe Texas A&M is going to have some rough spots because they're still trying to mend that defense. I expect them to be much improved on defense, but still finding a quarterback. It's going to be Kenny Hill. He was named the starter just a few days ago, but he's going to still be looking over his shoulder unless he really fires out of the gate. So they can beat Tennessee and Texas A&M. If they steal one of the other 3 against Alabama, LSU, and Auburn, bam, they're 3-2 in that stretch. They have survived the rough stretch. Then they got Presbyterian, which I want to check Presbyterian's schedule because I see them cropping up on big-time schedules all over the place, and I just found out that they're in South Carolina somewhere. Presbyterian, and then they finish up with Arkansas and Mississippi State, winnable games. Could they go 10-2? Maybe. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I think it's an 8-4, 9-3 football team, Stephen M.
First off, Mark, kudos to Presbyterian. Kudos to you for having Ole Miss on that schedule. Kudos to Presbyterian. As you mentioned, Mark, Ole Miss, they have the capabilities and the potential to go 10-2. I see them more 8-4, possibly 9-3 if they can sneak 1 or 2 games of that touch stretch, being at Alabama, Auburn, or LSU. I see them more so 9-3. But kudos to Presbyterian for putting Ole Miss on that schedule. Wow.
And again, I'm going to look at this Presbyterian schedule because, as I mentioned off the top, I'm knocking out every schedule in the country among Power 5 conferences, and I think they've shown up like 3 times. I think they're playing like North Carolina State. They're playing somebody else good. Presbyterian's got a better non-conference schedule than Alabama does. So anyway, that's the Ole Miss story, and I think we've wrapped it up for Ole Miss. And being the master producer that I am, Stephen M., I just thought the synergy, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, as we're knocking out 2 teams per week, it just kind of fit, didn't it? So Bulldog fans, don't jump on me here. There was no reason I picked Ole Miss to lead off with, and then I'm going with you number 2. That was in no way a slight. I just had to go one way or the other because I know that the venom runs deep there in Mississippi State with the Bulldogs and the Rebels. But we're going to talk some Mississippi State football. And Dan Mullen was on the hot seat as considered by some people. I don't know if he really was on the hot seat, but he was viewed to be on the hot seat at Mississippi State pretty late last season. Then the Dogs went on a run, and they came this close to missing a bowl game because they barely slipped by Arkansas on the road in overtime. They barely slipped by Ole Miss. If Bo Wallace hangs on to the football, they lose to Ole Miss in Starkville, and they could have finished the season 4-8. They were that close to finishing 4-8, but they get the 2 wins to get to 6-6. Then they annihilate Rice in the Liberty Bowl, and all is good. So suddenly, within the span of 3 games, they go from wow, the wheels are coming off a bit, and Dan Mullen's fighting for his job, and they win 2 overtime games, and they barely get to a bowl game. Then they look so impressive in the bowl game, and now it seems to be the trend is moving upward in Starkville for Mississippi State. When I say familiar faces there off the top of the slide there, what we're talking about with storylines for Mississippi State is they have, depending on your depth chart, the most starters coming back from 2013. So they are locked and loaded there at Mississippi State. So, Stephen M., your thoughts about the Dogs and possibly being the dark horse in this division?
They are the dark horse in this division, Mark. You look at the players, just the sheer talent they have returning. Dak Prescott at quarterback. The guy is 6'2". I saw him at SEC Media Days. Mark, the guy's jacked up. He's in the weight room. He's put on muscle. You can see the arm talent there, his mobility. Love what Dak Prescott brings to the table with that warrior mentality of we're going to get the job done. Yes, they lost Kadarius Perkins at running back to the Green Bay Packers in the National Football League, but you bring back Jamion Lewis, who is just a versatile, all-purpose. He can play receiver. You can flank him back at running back. He can play running back. He's an exceptional return man. And then you have sophomore returning receiver Darunion Wilson, who's 6'5", really can stretch the field, can go up, snatch the ball out of the air. Tremendous defensive side of the ball is where it's special because therein lies number 50 at linebacker, Bernardrick McKinney, 70 tackles, 3.5 sacks last season. He's up for the Chuck Benderek Award, the Bronco Nagurski Award. The guy's just instinctive. He's like a bloodhound, Mark. He has a nose for the football, finds the football, shoots the gaps, creates pressure, stuffs the run game well. And then the secondary, Mississippi State lost Nico Whitley, but they returned Tavez Calhoun and Jamerson Love. Those two combined had 6 interceptions last season. Mississippi State is a dark horse team. They have the talent to really get at least 9 wins. At least 9 wins this season. And I'm going to say they'll get 9 wins because they're a talented football team. They return 8% of an offense. This is a scary team.
They are a scary team. Dak Prescott is a guy that's been looking over his shoulder for quite some time because Russell was the quarterback there. He's a veteran quarterback and a much different styled quarterback than Dak Prescott. He was a pro-style quarterback who threw 24 touchdowns the year, 2012, when they went to the Gator Bowl. And then there was a battle for quarterback. Russell had some injury issues. Dak Prescott pretty much won the job. And again, Russell had some injury issues going into 2013. So they really had to revamp the offense for Dak Prescott's skills as a dual threat quarterback. He's a guy that, in talking to Mississippi State people that I know, he's been very much working on the techniques. He's been a raw product throwing the football in the past, but he's been more accurate throwing in the spring and now into the summer, into fall camp. He's been working on his running style as well. And what I mean by that, this guy loves collisions. He will take on any defender, and they don't want that. They need Dak Prescott on the field. They want him to be a smarter football player. Yeah, you got to keep him on the field. Watch the pad level. Get out of bounds. He's taken too much of a beating for the little time that he's played, and I don't mean that he's played a little bit of time, but it's not like he's had a long, lengthy career of starting for 3 years, and he's already taken a beating. They want him, even though Jamion Lewis, and you mentioned this guy, he's only 5'9", but he's an explosive receiver who's very smart, very intelligent, very sure-handed, caught 64 last year and 5 touchdowns. If you don't know about Jamion Lewis because you don't watch Mississippi State football games, then you need to check out the Bulldogs this year. And again, as Stephen M. points out, they might be good enough that you'll need to check them out late in the season in some of these big games. He's an exceptional receiver, but they're looking for a true second and third option, which they've got him, and they're going to look to make guys like Malcolm Johnson, who caught 30 balls last year, a little bit more involved in the offense. And you mentioned Stephen M., and it's a good point with Darunya Wilson because he's an exceptional talent as well. He caught 26 and 3 touchdowns. Josh Robinson's a guy to look out for on offense as well. He should be the staple running back. He stole a lot of carries from Ladarius Perkins, who was their number one guy, a 1,000-yard rusher the season before. But Josh Robinson took advantage of Ladarius Perkins suffering some injuries and ran for almost 500 yards and 3 touchdowns last year. Ashton Shumpert, a big sophomore running back, a kid that Mississippi State fans are very, very high on. He ran for just about 200 yards and 3 touchdowns as well. So this is a much deeper football team and more talented football team than we've seen in a long, long time in Starkville. Gabe Jackson, one of the better offensive linemen in college football, moves on to the NFL, but they're really high on his replacement as well. And just the offensive line was a bit of a concern. If there was one unit on the field that was pinpointed by a number of Mississippi State people going into the spring, it was, hey, we need offensive line development. And Jamal Claiborne is the guy that's kind of pinned as the next Gabe Jackson for that Mississippi State offensive line. And one more note, you bring up some of those guys in the secondary, Stephen M. I'm hearing that this secondary may not just be the best in the SEC, but very, very near the top of all of college football. In the secondary, you mentioned a few guys back there, as well as Justin Cox, who's a playmaker. Don't want to forget about Chris Jones. You mentioned Bernardo McKinney, who we've all rated as a top 5 linebacker in the SEC, and Chris Jones is a versatile defensive lineman who can line up inside and outside, played little high school football. This was Dan Mullen finding a diamond in the rough, and he had an exceptional season for Mississippi State and probably will break out even more here in 2014.
I think Chris Jones is going to break out huge in 2014, Mark. You talk about versatile guy, has developed pass rush women, can rip in, does a great job creating that leverage at the point of attack, really stunt inside on offensive linemen. He gets to the quarterback well. He gets to the running backs fluently. And when it comes down to finishing plays with big-time hits, Chris Jones is that player. Mississippi State, as I mentioned, Stark Vegas, Starkville, Cowbell Nation, they have something to cheer about. The question is, will that consistency factor be there? Like I talked about with Ole Miss, consistency is key. You can have all the talent in the books, but if that talent does not go out there on that field and perform day in and day out, it's no to get on a roll early in the season. I believe both teams, Ole Miss and Mississippi State, can be successful, but can they get on a roll early in the season is the question.
All right, 17 starters back for this Mississippi State football team as they look to make a splash in the Western Division. And we're not just talking about going 500 in the SEC and then winning 8 games and getting to a Gator Bowl. We're talking about, can they press the big 3 up there, LSU, Auburn, and Alabama. Some people think LSU's maybe a shade back of the top 2. We shall see. But Mississippi State, as we check out the schedule for 2014, again, I'm going to take my liberties at ripping this schedule. You can't knock Mississippi State in terms of the SEC. They play in the SEC. They're given an SEC schedule. So I'm not talking about the overall strength of the schedule. I'm talking about schedule somebody. Just schedule one team non-conference. Just one. They give us nothing here. Southern Miss, UAB, South Alabama. Then a little bit later in the season, they play the Giants of Tennessee Martin. So Mississippi State last year took on Oklahoma State. That's the kind of game I'm looking for a Mississippi State to play. Again, they've got 4 non-conference games, beat up on 2 teams. I got no issue with that. Take on UAB and South Alabama, beat up on them. And no slight to South Alabama, who took Tennessee to the wire, because South Alabama is a legit Sun Belt team that's going to compete for the conference championship in that league. But I'm talking about a team on your level. and Mississippi State's not doing that this year. So they're not going to do themselves any strength of schedule favors with Southern Miss, UAB, and South Alabama out of the gate, Stephen M.
Are you telling me, Mark? Are you telling me UAB, the School of Medical History, is on that schedule?
There they are, number 2. They are the second team on the schedule there, Stephen M. UAB.
Oh, baby.
So we've got Southern Miss off the top, UAB, and Southern Miss. I know that if you've lost track of Southern Miss in recent years, they're deplorable. 10, 15 years ago, very good football program, very strong Conference USA program, but not anymore. 1-11 last year for Southern Miss. Then it's UAB. Then it's a trip to South Alabama. So Mississippi State going on the road to South Alabama, which is interesting. Then later in the season against Tennessee Martin. If we look at the first half of the schedule, finally in week 4, okay, we're going to find out where Mississippi State stacks up against the top 3 in the division. They go to LSU to take on the Tigers. This game last season was a great game for a half. Then LSU stepped on the throttle in Starkville and laid waste to Mississippi State in the second half and scored like 58 points. Mississippi State lost to Texas A&M the last 2 years, but it really gave Johnny Manziel a run for his money last year and scored a ton of points against that atrocious defense. Then the Auburn game. So if we look at those 3 games, Stephen M., that's the season right there. If Mississippi State wants to contend in the West, they've got to win 2 out of those 3 games, definitely.
They're going to have to. If Mississippi State wants to win the West, and Dan Mullen wants to continue to push for his right to be talked about amongst the Sabins and the Les Miles of this conference, and also the Gus Malzahn's of this conference, Mississippi State is going to have to win in that gauntlet middle of that schedule, because it's going to prove how tough they are, how formidable they are, and most importantly, how ready they are to take that next step from being just a good team to being a threat, a challenging team in the Southeastern Conference.
I'm going to call Mississippi State a bit of a mini UCLA, and what I mean by that right this second is UCLA has become the chic pick nationally to make some noise, and people are excited, and I get that. I think UCLA's done a lot of great things under Jim Mora, and they're in great shape. They're on the ascension, no doubt, but I think people are jumping the gun just a bit, and they might be jumping the gun just a bit on Mississippi State. If we look at the back half of this schedule, again, this is after LSU, Texas A&M, and Auburn 3 consecutive weeks. Then they get a bit of a break here. Again, I hate the SEC scheduling where they've got the common opponent, the designated rival. For Mississippi State, it's Kentucky. That doesn't make any sense. But they play Kentucky every year, and until Mark Stoops gets that thing in shape, which he's working on, that's a huge break for Mississippi State. They get to play Kentucky every year. So they go to Kentucky. Then they got Arkansas, Tennessee Martin. So they should get back on a roll with 3 consecutive wins at least. And then they finish up Alabama, Vandy, Ole Miss, a legitimate finish there. And that's the Mississippi State schedule. I think that this team's going to definitely lose 2 games. I think they're 10-2 tops. I think they're probably 8-4. Because I still think that they're going to have difficulty going to LSU and winning there. And, again, Auburn and Alabama are just a bit deeper, faster, more talented, more top-end players. And the showdown for Mississippi State and Ole Miss, that last game of the season, could be for who knows. Again, if one of them breaks through with huge wins against that upper 3, then it could be, who knows, for all the marbles. I highly doubt it. I think it's just going to be for a better bowl game at this point. But your thoughts about the back half of this schedule, Stephen M.
Well, the back half of the schedule, they get a break with playing Kentucky. That's huge. But like you said, Mark, the ceiling for Mississippi State is 10-2. They have a chance to get 10 wins. They have the potential. They have the player personnel to get 10 wins. But realistically, I can see them at 8-4. As you said, playing against LSU is difficult. Whenever you take on Les Miles and John Chavis and the creative minds that those two share, and also with offensive coordinator, quarterback coach Cam Cameron, it's difficult to beat LSU. You look at Alabama and Auburn, Saban and Gus Malzahn, always fighting with each other. So you know if they're fighting with you being Mississippi State, it's not going to be easy on you either. So the ceiling for Mississippi State, if they can get it, it's 10-2. But realistically, I agree. I see them at 8-4, possibly another Gator Bowl or something similar to that. But 10-2 is the ceiling. But the question goes back to, will they start off on a roll early and build that consistent momentum into the season? Because it starts off by getting those early wins and building that confidence deeper into the season.
Yeah, the formula is pretty simple because they're going to go 4-0 in the non-conference. They go 4-4, 500 in the SEC. That puts them in good shape at 8-4, and I think that's about what we're looking at here. All right, who will be this week's X Factor? All right, we've looked at the Texas A&M quarterback situation. We lined up the sophomore and the freshman, and Kenny Hill won it this week. We've looked at the LSU wide receivers who are going to have to step up after the losses of Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry. We've looked at the Alabama quarterback situation. We've looked at a number of X factors, meaning unproven players needing to step up. Hudson Mason to a lesser extent because he proved his ilk against Georgia Tech and in the bowl game against Nebraska last season. We've talked South Carolina defensive line minus Quarles, Clowney, and Sutton. This week, this is a huge X factor. This is an off-the-charts X factor because we have not seen a Florida passing game that's been worth fill in the blank for quite some time. So the Florida wide receivers, there's a lot of them, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. It's almost like bringing players to training, to spring training in baseball, bringing pitchers, bringing 25 pitchers to training camp. It basically means you don't have any pitchers and you're just looking for everybody to show up. Now, I don't think that's the case at Florida. They've recruited well, but how much has been the quarterback, how much has been the wide receivers. But we just know flat out that the wide receivers have not stepped up and not made huge plays in this Florida offense since Urban Meyer's next to last season at Florida. Even his last season, they struggled in the passing game. So we're looking at Stephen M., a number of wide receivers there at Florida, a couple experienced guys right off the top in Quinton Dunbar, who caught 90 passes. These are career statistics we threw up there. He's made some plays, but again, 6 touchdowns for his career, not found the end zone. Andre Dubose is a guy that was hurt all of last season, and he's really made his big plays in the return game. And then I've got all sorts of players listed there. I do want to mention that maybe the most impressive physical specimen and in terms of speed and dynamic play, based on what Jeff Driscoll has had to say, is DeMarcus Robinson. And Chris Thompson, the sophomore down there who caught a couple passes last year, is probably the fastest guy there. So the Florida wide receivers, wow, we need something out of these guys this year.
We need something out of those guys this year, and with Florida bringing in Carl Roper to help with continuing to mold Jeff Driscoll's going to be key. Roper's going to continue to help Driscoll with the mechanics, with the footwork in the pocket, with the ability to scan the field, make right decisions with football. But you have Quinton Dunbar, who's your leading receiver. He's your experienced guy. You have Robinson and you have Thompson there. Both of those two guys, energy in a bottle type players that can make huge plays on post routes, slant routes, deep fade routes, great speed. They can work a little bit more on route running abilities, but with the speed and the quick grasping hands that they have, they really both bring something to the table that Florida can use. But it starts with Jeff Driscoll and him taking that coaching from offensive coordinator, quarterback coach Carl Roper, and trying to mold him to being that elite SEC quarterback. Because we remember back in 2011, 2012, when Florida went to the Sugar Bowl. That year, Jeff Driscoll had 14 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Now, yes, Louisville took them to the woodshed that season with Teddy Bridgewater, but you saw the potential of what Jeff Driscoll could be. Now that he's fresh off the injury, fresh off the broken fibula against Tennessee, he's going to be able to calm down, come into a Carl Roper system, and really develop more on his mechanics. The receivers are going to have to make some big plays for him down the stretch, but it's going to start with Jeff Driscoll letting the game come to him, dissect it down, and getting the football out.
Got a couple guys listed there in LaTroy Pittman Jr. and Valdez Showers who had surprising springs. They both played extremely well, and these guys are limited in regards to experience. If you look specifically at LaTroy Pittman, he's a guy that came in playing running back and corner in high school. They moved him to wide receiver, and again, he broke out in the spring, had a nice spring, as did Valdez Showers, a guy that really broke out again in the spring, showed really good speed, emerged as a consistent target during the practices, a guy that didn't drop the football. Pittman saw a lot of action as a true freshman in 2012. He played all but one game, got a couple starts. He was a backup last year, played 9 games. They just have so many guys contending for spots on this team. It's going to be interesting to see who emerges over the next 10 days to see who gets. I think we know who the starting receivers are, but again, you need many more than just 2 guys in that passing offense. You need 3 and 4, maybe 5 guys due to injuries, and just 4 wide receiver sets, guys that are going to contribute. Andre Dubose, redshirted again, granted a 6th year of eligibility in March, did not participate in full contact play in the spring, still rehabbing from a torn ACL. That kept him off the field entirely in 2013. Again, he's been explosive in the return game in previous seasons. They would love to get that back, plus get something from him in the passing game as well. So, man, Florida fans, we would like for you to chime in if you've gone out to practice and see who's playing really well, if you've been able to I know most of these sessions are 90% closed to the fans and media, but then they at times let some people in to check out some spurts in practice to see who are those guys that are there's information leaking out about who's making plays and who's made plays in these scrimmages for the Florida Gators, because again, they got a lot of guys vying for few positions. You would think Dunbar, and I know Dunbar is going to be a starter, and probably DeMarcus Robinson, the 2 starters. And then beyond that, we'll see who gets playing time for the Florida Gators. It should be interesting at wide receiver. I do think that this team's going to be much improved in terms of the record. How can they not be at 4-8? They've got so much more talent than that, and the defense is going to be exceptional, barring injury. And that was the big bugaboo for this defense last season, was they just got crippled with injuries to top performers. Driscoll went down, and I know people nationally and even around the SEC don't give Jeff Driscoll a ton of credit, but I think he did quite a bit with what he had in 2012. 14 TDs, 5 picks, converted third downs all the time with his legs. He's a guy that gets out of the pocket. He can make the throws. That's why he was one of the top recruited quarterbacks coming out of high school, is he's an exceptional athlete and passer. Again, he hasn't gotten the help from the guys in space, and he needs that this season in Florida. They're not in the top 25 preseason, but they may finish in the top 25 when it's all said and done. They've got the talent to do so. No question about that in Gainesville. All right, Stephen M., every week we look at a different position, and we've grinded down to the very last couple positions here on the field, and some wouldn't say it's a position, but hey, if you don't have that guy that can put it through the pipes at the end of the game, that could cost your team a game or two at the end of the season. So we need those place kickers to get the job done. And I've lined up what I think are the top 5 in the league. We've lost a couple good ones in Kerry Spear and also Zach Hocker, who really had a dynamic leg at Arkansas, kicking those 50-some yarders. But these are the top 5 that I like out of the SEC, and then I'd like for you to chime in and see what you got looking at these kickers. So Andrew Baggett at Missouri, he did miss 7 kicks, hit 18 of 25, but he started 3 for 6 in the non-conference play. Then he got much better after that. I'm getting the thumbs up from Stephen M. on the selection of Baggett at number 5, and really pulled through late in the season, 2 for 2 in the SEC championship game, and then Baggett was 2 for 2 against Oklahoma State in a tight win over the Cowboys in the Cotton Bowl. At number 4, definitely off the radar because of the team he plays for, is Joe Mansour from Kentucky. But if you look at just straight stats, 12 of 14 last season, and he did the job from distance as well for the Wildcats. And who knows? We've seen 2 top 25 recruiting classes come in for the Wildcats. We would expect them to be a little bit more competitive against the lower tier of the SEC, and he may come into play and need to win a couple games for Kentucky, and could be the difference between, who knows, 3-9 and 4-8 or 5-7 for the Wildcats this season. I don't think we're going to get them quite to a bowl game this year, but man, Mark Stoops has recruited well, and he's got them on the right path. Okay, Stephen M. At number 3, I got Elliott Fry out of South Carolina. He was 15 for 18 as a freshman. I don't think we can discount that. As a freshman, he kicked in some of the bigger games in the SEC last season. We all remember that Missouri game when the Gamecocks came back from 17 down in the fourth quarter, took it to overtime, won the game. He won that game in terms of the points scored to win the game, hit 2 field goals against Mizzou, hit 4 of 5 against Florida when they won 19-14. He was 6 of 8 from 40 to 49 yards. So Elliott Fry, coming off a very, very strong freshman season in the SEC, looks to do even better as a sophomore. Then we got another sophomore. So again, as a freshman, Colby De La Houssaye out of LSU hit 13 of 14 for the Tigers. So they look to be in good shape, place kicking, the LSU Tigers. And then I got number 1. I'm going with Marshall Morgan out of Georgia. He hit 22 of 24. What I liked about the numbers that he put up, as Stephen M. again gives me the thumbs up, so I'm feeling confident about this top 5, is he hit 2 out of 3 from plus 50. And this is a guy that's now in a junior season in which he only hit 8 of 14. So struggled a bit as a freshman, really improved. And I looked at, not only, I wasn't looking at Stephen M., just the flat-out percentages and field goal statistics, but I was looking at distance, and I was also looking at those close games. Did this guy make a difference? And in Marshall Morgan's case, they beat LSU 44-41. He hit 3 of 3 in that game. They beat Tennessee in overtime. He won the game against Tennessee in overtime. He hit 2 field goals against the Vols to avoid the upset on the road. And against Florida, Georgia only won that game by a field goal, hit 3 of 3 against the Gators. So he was the difference in like 3 football games where a bad field goal kicker might have cost Georgia another couple football games there. So that's what I got. I got Baggett at 5, Mansour at 4, Fry at 3, De La Houssaye at number 2, and Marshall Morgan out of Georgia at number 1. So, Stephen M., these are the guys that aren't necessarily quote-unquote football players, but they decide football games.
Mark, everyone talks about offense and defense, but special teams is truly the lost art of college football. When you have the ability to score as a kicker, to put the ball through the goalpost, it gives that offense an extra weapon. Everybody likes the touchdown. I love a touchdown. We all want to score 6 points, 7 points. Even when you can't get 6, when you're able to drive the ball downfield and get 3, just get something. It builds the confidence of your offense. And having these kickers, especially with Marshall Morgan, De La Houssaye at LSU, and Baggett at Missouri, those 3 guys are leaders. They know how to get the job done with their leg, whether they're kicking it from the middle of the field, from the left hash, the right hash, kicking into the wind, what have you. They know how to have that. They know how to have that ice in the veins mentality, go up to the plate and make the kicks when it counts. And special teams, it's a lost art because you either make them and become the greatest of all time, or you miss and you become the scrutinized player of all time. So it's a very polarizing position, but boy, when you make them, and when you make them when it counts, oh baby, does the love come? Does the love come?
Check out field goal percentages both in the NFL and in college football over the past 10 to 15 years. These guys have become so good. That's why there's thoughts in the NFL about moving back the extra point, because it's gone from being like maybe an 85% play 40 years ago to a 99 point something percent play in the NFL now. And obviously, those NFL kickers coming from the college ranks, these college kids are becoming so good. Look at the percentages that we just laid down for these guys. 13 out of 14, 12 out of 14, 22 out of 24, 15 out of 18, out of freshmen. They are that good. They have become that specialized. The technique, the coaching of special teams and kicking, the kicking specialized art of kicking, and in particular at the high school ranks with the camps that these kids go to, has become so specialized and so detailed that these kids come into the college ranks that good that they can take on the pressure of 100,000 people in the stadium. And like you say, all that speed and rush coming from the defense and still hitting 85, 90% of their kicks. And it's just a truly amazing to see. And again, decides football games much of the time. All right, Stephen M., this being, what is it, August 18th. You know what this means? Next week's show, we are staring straight at football. We're staring straight at SEC football games. We're staring straight at Texas A&M, South Carolina, Ole Miss and Boise State, Alabama, West Virginia, LSU, Wisconsin, on and on and on. Georgia, Clemson. Let's not forget about that one. Some great football matchups in week one. Ole Miss taking on Boise State. And it's a really good smorgasbord of football for the SEC in week one. And the SEC sitting at the top of college football despite the championship loss. I think we would all agree this is the best conference top to bottom in the country. And week one, the slate is clean, and I would love to see all the perceptions go away, and let's see what happens on the field in the SEC again in taking on the likes of West Virginia, Boise State, Wisconsin, Clemson. We're going to see some top competition come against the SEC. We'll see how it plays out, Stephen M.
Mark, I am so excited. This is my favorite time of year. It's college football time. It's time for the clipboards, the pads, the helmets, the cleats to come back out, the play calling, just these players playing for the pride of a jersey, for the respect of a school and the respect of a program. It's just time to get your popcorn ready, your Gatorade out of the cooler, and get those barbecued hot dogs and hamburgers back on the grill. I mean, it's college football at its best.
All right, Stephen M., we know that you're pumped for the season. There's no doubt about that. What do you got going on that we can check out on touchdownalabama.net and elsewhere?
Well, right now on touchdownalabama.net, I'm in the process of coming up with the 5 toughest games in the SEC, the 5 toughest games on Alabama's schedule this season. I'm going to do a piece on the 5 toughest games, and I'm also previewing West Virginia, coming up with some preview scenarios for the West Virginia Mountaineers. That game, August 30th. The actual first issue of Touchdown Alabama magazine hits the shelves on August 22nd. So August 22nd, the first issue of Touchdown Alabama magazine hits the shelves. Also, in this upcoming week, I'm breaking down some college football specials with Double Overtime Radio in Seattle, and also my man Bo from Speaking on Sports. I'll be on his show on September the 5th, touching on the first week of college football. So I'm going to all over the map here, but we'll be just fine, Mark. We will be just fine.
Here are the Mark Rogers TV Cliff Notes preview on the Alabama-West Virginia game. Alabama 45-13. But people that want a serious analysis obviously have to check you out. But I do not see much of a football game.
They're giving the Coons cap a 13.
Yeah, I might give them 13. Maybe they tack on a touchdown late in mop-up play. I just don't see much of a game. I know Alabama's breaking in a new quarterback, whether that be Coker or Sims, but the talent on these two teams are so in different galaxies that I just don't see much of a game in that one. I want to remind everybody again, SEC in 60 every Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern and noon Central. If you want to catch us live, Then we'll have it posted on YouTube at MarkRogersTV and also at MarkRogersTV.com about 90 minutes to 2 hours later. And then, hey, if you're a podcast person that's on the go, wants to hear it, and is on the move, we've got the podcast available, the SEC in 60, every Tuesday morning, as well as our college football podcast, Mark Rogers TV's College Football Podcast, available every Friday, where we look at the other Power 5 conference teams as well. We've got videos going all week. We're knocking out every schedule in the country among Power 5 conference teams, top 10 at each position around college football, top 5 in the SEC as well. And we bring on bloggers constantly. We've got a number of guests coming up in the next 5 to 10 days, as well as we preview the 2014 college football season. And again, follow me on Twitter at MarkRogersTV and take part in our poll question and just stir up a conversation about college football, and do it as well with Stephen M. Smith at ESPN_future, and we've got it listed right there for Stephen M. Smith. Hey, Stephen M., we appreciate you coming on with the energy, the vibe, and the information for us, man.
Me, I enjoy this.
This is good stuff each and every Monday, and we'll get into the season, and then it gets amped up about 1,000 times more. Our special thanks. We cannot thank him enough. Mr. Marty McPadden, doing an exceptional job behind the scenes, director, producer, deluxe. Again, doing an exceptional job, lending his many skills to the SEC in 60 in the last few weeks, as we have upped the ante in the production value for you, the fan. And we want to hear from you, so please leave your comments, and we will talk some college football. Until next week, may God bless you, and we will see you next Monday.